Welcome back to another exciting episode of Cyber Defense TV. I'm your host, Gary Malevsky, and the publisher of Cyber Defense Magazine. Sitting in my hot seat today is a very special guest. It's Adam Gavish. He is the co-founder and CEO of DoControl, which is www.docontrol.io. Adam, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
Now, DoControl is an innovator. You've spent a lot of years fixing cloud security for major companies. I don't think I should name the names, like Amazon and Google. In any case, you founded DoControl to solve a big problem. And I want to understand, is there a difference between data access control and IAM with all these SaaS apps in the cloud?
100%. Let me clarify. So the average enterprise today leverages quite a few SaaS applications just to drive business. And the first thing they need to do so is some kind of an identity provider, an IAM, like you mentioned, like Okta or Azure AD, to create and provision those users and permissions. Then the second thing, over time, they had to deploy zero trust solution to secure remote access, because people use SaaS applications from every device and every location. But after those two components, all the users are pretty much inside of SaaS applications, and from there, they share information extensively, externally and publicly, with vendors and suppliers and consultants and customers and partners and whatnot, again, to drive business. But at the same time, they also share with their own private accounts, and then they leave the company, and when their contract gets terminated, but they all still have access to your information. And so there's a huge amount of unmanageable data access that is just sitting out there, posing risk to your organization and increasing the likelihood for data breach.
What's the difference? Is this APIs and credentials? Is this connectors? Where are you finding data access that shouldn't still be accessible, and who's accessing it?
Sure thing. So generally, you have employees and you have external collaborators all using the same company data over SaaS application. And so data gets moved from one thing to
like
one
Dropbox,
point to another.
Salesforce.
Dropbox and Google Drive and Salesforce and GitHub and Teams and Slack and whatnot. So data access basically is the permission employees grant to external collaborators in order to consume those files over time. But those permissions are not relevant forever, because vendor contract gets terminated, employees leave the company, customers leave you, but nobody takes care of that. And so there's so many different acts that remain open while they're not relevant anymore.
Now, a lot of people call that shadow IT, right? Where you've got accounts that are still accessible. But again, I've heard that term in IAM, identity and access management. I still want to get our viewers and listeners to understand the nuance between what you do and what an IAM solution does. So if you could.
So IAM solution really focus on the identities, on the user. Who is the user that we're created for? Gary from the marketing team, what kind of permission that user has, to what files the user can access, and so on. What we do, we focus on the data itself stored in SaaS application. There are so many file channels, repositories, cases, whatever. We protect the data from being exposed to the wrong personnel. So instead of focusing on the identities of the users who are accessing the data, we are focusing on the data access itself, so that we can reduce the access to achieve least privilege model at scale.
How does that work? And are you inline? Are you an intrusion prevention system to access to the data? And is it flat files? Is it database structures? Is it SQL calls? It sounds so ingenious, but I still don't quite get where you fit in the network.
That's okay. So our solution is completely agentless and API based. We have connector to more than 12 different SaaS applications today that everybody uses. What we do, we subscribe to the webhook event of those applications, or in simple English, whenever users create, share, view, delete, or whatever, we get that metadata directly from each SaaS provider, so that we can have continuous monitoring across those user behavior. What we also do, we pull in all the metadata for all the assets, the files, the channels, the repositories, and all of that, to curate the inventory, to provide asset management capabilities. And the last thing on top of those two capabilities is the policy enforcement. We have our own automated security workflow engine that can be applied consistently across those apps. For example, whenever people share with this vendor, please just auto-expire the sharing after 30 days across SharePoint and Slack and Teams and GitHub or whatever. This cannot be done correctly across those different apps because they expose very different security capabilities, right?
But we never. So you're saying you have a compliance and workflow system to say, look, to protect the data, we're only working with this consulting firm for a month. Let's just expire their data access on the 31st day. And it automatically takes care of that. And if they try to get access to the data, you'll block that and send an alert that they're still trying to get in.
Exactly. And in the preventative measure, right, you can prevent bad things from happening moving forward by making sure you have a clear list of all the vendors you don't work with anymore, all the former employees, all the private accounts for existing employees. You can just prevent sharing with all of those consistently across different apps.
Adam, what are the SaaS apps that you work with?
So we work with all of the Microsoft Shop, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive. We work with Google Drive, both the personal drive and shared drive. We work with Box, Dropbox. Those are all the file sharing systems. Now we also work with Slack and Teams because there's a lot of file sharing over there and external channel. We work with GitHub and Bitbucket over repositories that can be shared publicly and can be shared to external collaborators. And we also work with Okta and Azure AD in order to pull in all those groups to provide the granularity. And it's just the beginning.
If a client said, yeah, I get it. If a client said, boy, I wish you had a connector to HubSpot or something, how long would it take your team to develop that?
Sure thing, great question. So when we started, it took a lot of time. It took us like a month and a half, but we built a system in a way that allows us to move faster today. And today it takes us between 2 to 3 weeks to add any connector, depending on the customer requirement, of course.
That's great. So DoControl.io is new and innovative and different. I haven't heard of anyone doing data access security at the level you're doing it in the cloud. It sounds like you're the first horse to the race, which is exciting. And what are you doing in the long haul to augment IAM? For example, I could see a single pane of glass. I could see an HR team and an IT team actually working together for one, saying, okay, we onboarded this employee or we offboarded this consultant, and the proper controls get put in place automatically through your workflow system.
That's a great question. It's actually in our short-term roadmap. When you think about it, we can connect to HR apps like Bamboo HR, ADP, or Workday. And instead of HR and security or IT people meeting together and trying to navigate this chaos, we can just get a ping directly from the app saying, hey, that employee is labeled as leaving. Then we can narrow down that employee. First of all, reduce their access, keep track of everything they shared in the last 30 days, and remove all of the external sharing to personal accounts and former vendors and so on to reduce the risk and liability companies take in when laying employees off.
Adam, do you do audits for people? Do you say, hey, look, we've plugged in our system and a week later you find all these data access points that just shouldn't be open? It seems to me that people need to assess an audit right away and you're going to find something that they shouldn't be doing.
That's how exactly our POV process is working. We onboard a company, it takes 5 to 7 minutes to onboard because it's all API based. And then within a week time, we provide them a really comprehensive analysis that walks through the assets, the users, the collaborators, the external domains, the exposure. We basically break it down into 7 major threat models, give them scores, and based on that, provide a recommendation for the remediation path that can be using our platform. I'll give you an example. A 1,000 people company we recently acquired as a customer, they have 15,000 external collaborators.
Wow.
Across 3,000 companies. And they only exist for 5 years. And so, particularly for hyper-growth companies, this is tremendous. So the value is definitely there within a week time.
And what's interesting, every breach, other than a ransomware attack, every breach, although it's the similar end result, people don't think it's the data. We have to protect the data. The core of every breach is getting at the data, stealing the data, covert exfiltration of the data. And whether it's a malicious insider, post-COVID, malicious insiders are people in the cloud who are consultants and employees working from home. So really the coin is flipped over and we're on the backside of the coin. We're not intranets anymore, we're extranets. So without a product or solution like yours to secure the data and lock it down, I think we've got too many front doors open.
Yep, I feel like it's a great timing now to focus on the data because at the end of the day, the industry have tried to focus on permission, but people don't want to be expert in permission, but they do know the data. They have the context. They know what needs to be shared or not.
How long? You said 5 to 7 minutes to get deployed on a network with thousands of people?
Yep. Yep. It's not on a network. It's basically a direct connection to the SaaS application. But yeah.
To their SaaS app, yeah. And then you can add apps in a couple weeks if someone said,
Yep.
boy, I wish you could keep an eye on my data and this other, I'm using Box and they're using Dropbox, or I'm using this CRM and they're using another one, and things like that. There's so many SaaS apps to keep up with today. It's amazing. Can you give me an example of, and I know it's early in the game, but some kind of client type that would really need this the most? Is it e-commerce? Is it banks? Is it insurance? Is it healthcare? Is it government contractors? Is it every vertical? Who needs this the most?
Just every marketing trend, you have the bell curve, right? You have early adopters and laggards, right? So I think all of those customer verticals you mentioned, they need it. But at the end of the day, you have the early adopters, tech companies, media, who are more likely to try out new products. But we also work with financial institutions that are less likely to adopt newer products, but they do take in more risk than tech companies. So we benefit from these kind of customers as well.
If you can close banks and financial institutions, that's where the money is. As this famous in America, we had this criminal called Willie Sutton, the bank robber, famous bank robber in the 1800s. They finally caught up to him and they said, why do you rob banks? And he said, that's where the money is. The hackers do the same thing. Data protection, complementary to identity and access management, very helpful to HR, onboard and offboard people and their access to the data. Is there anything else that you want to share that you do or that we haven't covered for our viewers?
Yes. Actually, yes. The one thing we missed the opportunity to talk about is the fact that at the end of the day, you have thousands of people of companies and then a very small security and IT team. They don't have the context to why people share what they share for whatever reason. They don't know. But they do have the visibility to the logs. They know, they see when people share. So they ask them, why do you share this? Why do you share that? And then, of course, it's not scalable and it's also very annoying. It creates like an unnecessary tension. So what we did, we built a Slack and Teams bot that reach out to employees automatically on behalf of the security and IT team. Wow. And just ask them a very simple question. Are you sure you want to share it, yes or no? And if they say yes, we're like, okay, whatever. If they say no, we're going to remove it on behalf of all people involved. And the IT and security team, they get the analytics across the organization to where the risk is higher and lower. If the marketing team is more engaged, they're like, okay. But if the finance team is less engaged, they're like, okay, focus on them in terms of security awareness.
So are you almost crowdsourcing the intelligence for data access in a company by letting the employees get involved in answering those questions?
At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to provide a really good balance between business enablement and security. You can't restrict sharing at all. You can't let it loose entirely, right? So by looping in the employees, you have a really good middle ground. They can always share how much as they want, but we can always auto expire the sharing to reduce the risk. That's the equation.
Sounds great. Adam, last question. Who can afford this? And is it priced only for large enterprises or can SMBs? Is it something you'll want to partner with MSSPs to deploy? What's the market pricing and where does it fit in the market?
Sure thing. So we're trying to simplify the business model according to CISO's requirements. We charge per user so much annually upfront, and the prices range from like a few dollars per user to $15 and $20 per user, depending on the organization size. Now we sell to mid-market players like 500 people, 1,000 people, and enterprises, thousands of people and more. It's good for both, for different reasons. Some need more of the enforcement things, some need more of the user education and analytics, but it definitely works for both.
That's awesome. Now, Adam Gavish, you are the co-founder and CEO of DoControl at DoControl.io. This has been a wonderful hot seat. I really enjoyed it with you. I want to send our viewers and listeners to your site. Sounds like they can have a proof of value up and running very quickly, mid-market to large enterprise, and away we go with securing data access, something that very few companies have figured out. So congratulations, and thank you for a great hot seat.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to discuss with me.
And then folks, come back next time for another exciting episode of Cyber Defense TV.